There's this feeling you get sometimes, right? After something big happens globally,
Hmm.
like you're a bit adrift maybe, wondering if that smooth forward progress we kind of took for granted is
Yeah.
well over.
Yeah, that sense of things being shaken up, that uncertainty, it's potent and definitely not new.
Right.
If you look back, say, 100 years to just after the First World War, people felt exactly that, a real shock to the system.
And that specific feeling, that moment in history, that's our focus for this deep dive. We're looking at a source from right then, H.G. Wells's 1921 book, The Salvaging of Civilization. It feels surprisingly relevant.
It really does. Wells looked around at that post-war landscape, kind
Mm.
of like we might look around now after our own recent upheavals, and he basically saw civilization, his words, tumbling down and tumbling down very fast.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, he was convinced, utterly convinced that unless something huge, something radical was done, it was game over.
So our mission here is to get into Wells's diagnosis, like why he thought civilization was failing back then, and then explore his really ambitious, almost audacious plan to exit.
A plan he flat out called a world state.
A world state. Okay. So the diagnosis first. What did he see as the core problem after 1914?
Well, he felt that before the war, there was this sort of assumption of easy, steady progress, just moving forward.
Yeah.
But the war, he said, it checked violently and perhaps arrested altogether that momentum. It wasn't just the fighting, it showed a deep underlying incapacity to deal with these massive destructive forces that had been building up.
So the war was like a symptom, revealing a bigger issue.
Exactly. And the fundamental issue for Wells was this huge mismatch. He talks about a complete alteration in the range and power of human activities over the previous century. You know, science, new explosives, steam power, coal.
Right, all the Industrial Revolution stuff.
Yeah. But, and this is the key, no adequate adjustment of men's political ideas to the new conditions. Oh, okay. So technology zoomed ahead. But the way we thought about organizing ourselves politically was stuck.
Precisely. Society, for centuries, was built on a manpower and horsepower system. States were limited by how fast news could travel, basically high road and coach horse states.
Makes sense.
Then suddenly you get railways, steamships, the telegraph, later aircraft.
Yeah.
Human power and connection increase, maybe tenfold, he suggests. But the political boundaries, the ideas about sovereignty, still based on those old, slow limits.
And this played out differently in different places. He contrasts Europe and America.
He does. He saw this new tech as an opportunity in the U.S., which was still expanding, less hemmed in. It allowed for a bigger scale of state to emerge more naturally, a fortunate exception, he called it.
Then in Europe.
In crowded, settled, border-filled Europe, it was a frightful nuisance. All that new power and connection crammed into old containers just created congestion, and worse.
Worse how? Because that same power, confined by those old nationalisms, fundamentally changed war. It went from being maybe a harsh but normal aspect of the conflict for existence to becoming a terror and a threat for the entire species.
Wow. And he was looking beyond the Great War, too, wasn't he? Predicting what future wars would look like.
Yeah, chillingly so. He foresaw much faster, wider destruction, targeting civilians directly because every able-bodied citizen is a potential producer. Think bombing runs 1,000 miles beyond the military front.
Good grief.
Seas swept by mines and submarines. And crucially, a future where the winner and loser are almost equally ruined. A triumph, he called it, of the exhausted and dying over the dead. Pretty grim stuff.
Unbelievably grim. So if nothing changed, what was the outlook?
Just decline, a steady process of violence, decadence, and misery towards extinction. Or maybe changing into something we wouldn't even recognize as human. Just endless, pointless wars grinding civilization down.
Okay, so faced with that, what did he make of the efforts people were trying? Like the League of Nations. Was that the answer?
Not even close, in his view. Well-intentioned, maybe, but totally inadequate. He had this great analogy.
Okay.
He said it was like having a mad elephant rampaging in your garden. And you give your gardener this tiny, small rook rifle and say, well, it's better than nothing.
Okay.
Wells says, no, you're not getting rid of the elephant. You're just getting rid of the gardener.
Huh. Right. So the League was the rook rifle.
Pretty much. He thought it lacked any real teeth, representative sanctions, military forces, or authority of any kind. It left out huge parts of the world. And the big danger was that its inevitable failure would just make people cynical about any world-unifying efforts, create disillusionment.
So, massive global problem, technology outplacing politics, war becoming species-threatening, and the current solutions are like pea shooters against an elephant. What then is Wells's big idea, this project of a world state.
His conclusion is stark. He says, unless mankind can readjust its political and social ideas, unless it can eliminate or control its pugnacity, that downward spiral is basically guaranteed.
So change the thinking or perish.
Exactly. The only way out, he sees, is this immense worldwide effort of cooperation and mutual toleration and salvage. And that means, point blank, ditching separate sovereign states and setting up an armed and strong world law.
And he really stresses this isn't just some fantasy, right? He calls it a project, not a utopia.
Yes, that's critical. Because, he says, if it fails, our civilization fails. It's not a nice to have. It's presented as absolutely necessary for survival.
Okay, so what would this world state actually look like, according to Wells? Did he picture a world president or something?
He actually questioned if you'd need a single leader. Is the world state likely to be a monarchy? Must you? He asks. He thought more about a human commonweal under the God of all mankind, maybe represented by senior judges or speakers of a council if you needed a figurehead.
A council? How would that work?
He imagined it possibly directly elected with a really broad franchise so every adult feels personally connected like a participating citizen. And he had this interesting idea, it might be very taciturn, communicating through clear, short notes for easy translation, not relying on grand speeches.
Efficient, I guess. And did he outline specific functions, like ministries?
Oh, yeah, he gets quite specific. A Supreme Court for world law, a single world currency, global ministries for posts, transport, communications, a ministry of trade, and interestingly, conservation of natural resources, quite forward-thinking for 1921.
Definitely.
Also, ministries for social and labor conditions, world health, and the absolute core, a peace ministry. This would absorb all the national war offices and have sole control over all remaining armed forces worldwide.
So its main job is just keeping the peace and managing global systems, not competing with other states.
Exactly. He thought his job would be enormously simplified in many ways. No foreign enemies, no arms races, no tariffs, no plotting. It would come from a totally different place than national governments.
And the upside. If this actually worked, what was the potential payoff he saw?
Oh, the vision is huge. Given a world law and world security, he writes, you unlock free movement, fellowship, science, health, power, interest, happiness for everyone.
Sounds pretty good.
He pictures things like easily flying to the ends of the earth smoothly, abundant food and clothing, getting rid of slums and building spacious and beautiful cities, doubling production and leisure time. Basically, he says, we could live in a universal palace and make the whole globe our garden and playground.
Wow. That's utopian, even if he didn't want to call it that. But he does temper it a bit, doesn't he? With a dose of realism.
He absolutely does. He throws in that crucial caveat. Fear and hate, not hope and desire, have been hitherto the effective spurs for men. He knew people would likely sneer at utopias. That they oddly preferred the romance, as he put it, of passports, customs, shortages, and youths dying in heaps in muddy trenches. It's a stark acknowledgement of human nature, or at least human habits.
It really is. Okay, so we have the diagnosis, tech politics mismatch. We have the cure, the World State Project. What did Wells see as the biggest things standing in the way?
Number one, he says, is the manifest absence of any sufficient will in the general mass of mankind. Just apathy.
People just don't care enough.
He felt most people are creatures of our immediate surroundings, focused on the day-to-day. He uses this image of a van full of well-fed rabbits rolling towards the sea, completely unaware. They do not seem to care nor want to care about the big picture, the political structures.
Ouch. That's a bleak view of the average person. And what about the powers that be? Governments.
That's the other huge obstacle, the obstinate determination of existing governments to hang on to their power, their sovereignty. This, he argued, makes any truly constructive proposal seem revolutionary.
So change has to come from outside the system.
He believes so. It would have to be driven by voluntary and unofficial effort, probably in the teeth of official opposition.
Which leads right into the thorny issue of patriotism, doesn't it?
Absolutely. He confronts it head on. It's impossible not to bump against European patriotisms, he says. And then, very bluntly, the two things are flatly opposed. One or other must be sacrificed. World state or sovereign nations can't have both.
And he saw a difference between European and American patriotism.
A fascinating difference. European patriotism, he thought, was narrow, tied to old borders, old rivalries. American patriotism, however, he saw as a larger, different thing, a kind of synthesis of European patriotism.
Oh, so?
Like, immigrants brought their European identities, but a large factor of European patriotism hasn't been washed out to make way for his American patriotism. It became
Right.
something broader, more inclusive, potentially.
So the American experience offered a glimmer of hope, like proof that people can adopt a wider loyalty.
That was his hope, yeah.
Yeah.
If Europeans could shed narrow national ties and gain a wider American identity by crossing the ocean, maybe Europeans still in Europe could eventually gain a wider world patriotism.
And did he see any evidence that this wider feeling was actually possible, even briefly?
He did. He points to the initial, almost global enthusiasm for President Wilson's ideas for the League back in 1918. For a moment, he felt there was this great hopefulness manifest in the world. People everywhere, from China and Bukhara to Iceland and Basutoland, seemed ready for one piece of justice throughout the earth.
Even though it didn't last.
Right. It faded quickly. But for Wells, that moment proved the potential was there. The spirit for something beyond the nation-state could be kindled.
Okay, so we have these massive hurdles: apathy, governments clinging to power, deep-seated patriotism, but also this potential for a wider loyalty. How on earth does Wells propose we get from here to there? What's the actual path forward to this world state?
It is really the core of his argument, and maybe the most surprising part. He insists the job is not primarily one for the diplomatists and lawyers and politicians at all.
No. And who?
It is an educational one. That's his answer. It requires a fundamental shift in thinking, a moral based on an intellectual reconstruction. We need, he says, a worldwide common vision of the history and destinies of the race.
Everything comes down to education.
Everything. He says, upon that basis, and upon that alone, can you actually build a functioning world system.
And he thought the tools were finally available to do that globally.
Yes, because of modern communication. He contrasts it with how Christianity or Islam spread slowly, by word of mouth, by hand-copied texts. But now, he says, we have the press, print, books, lectures, tools to spread ideas much faster, much wider.
So education itself needs revolution. You can't just keep teaching the same old stuff.
Absolutely not. He blasts schools for teaching narrow loyalties to your sect, your class, and especially intolerant, greedy, and unrighteous nationalism.
Oof.
The vital step, he argues, is the broadening of the reference of the teaching to that community of the world. He literally says educational reform and political reconstruction are the right and left hands of the same thing.
Wow. And this linking leads him to propose something really ambitious, this Bible of Civilization. What was that about?
Yeah, it sounds dramatic, but his reasoning was practical. He felt civilization needed re-cementing. The traditional Bible, he argued, just didn't address modern life. What are your duties as a citizen in an election? As a shareholder? What about modern property rights or health issues?
Right, stuff the old texts couldn't have foreseen.
Exactly. So he proposed creating this new Bible of civilization to provide a new common basis for a world culture.
And what would be in this new Bible?
He outlined 4 main parts. First, a book of world history, a standard history written by international experts teaching everyone their common history and pointing towards a common future, and it would need regular updates.
A shared human story. Makes sense. What else?
Second, books of conduct and wisdom. This sounds like a mix of practical advice and ethics, a kind of new Leviticus with clear injunctions on self-care, health, plus a detailed moral code about property.
Property. Why focus on that?
He thought clearly defining acceptable uses of property could actually solve many labor disputes because most conflicts, he felt, involved some unsettled question of principle about ownership or rights.
Interesting. Okay, history, conduct. What's third?
Third, anthologies of poetry and literature. But he was quite specific here, not just any great writing. It had to be a carefully chosen canon of stuff that would cement world culture.
So utilitarian literature.
Pretty much. He explicitly says no whole Shakespeare plays or novels in this core Bible. They belong in the Great Books Library. The selections had to unify, not just be beautiful or profound in themselves.
Strict. And the fourth part.
Fourth, a book of forecasts. This would replace the old religious prophecies. His idea was that world leaders, presidents, kings, whoever, should have to publicly state their plans and visions for the future.
Like what?
Like, will the U.S. aim to dominate or cooperate? What's the 25-year plan for Ireland or India? He thought making these intentions public would create a real control at laugh that will rule presidents and kings because people could judge their plans.
Public accountability for the future. That's radical. So this Bible provides the content. What about the delivery system? The schools themselves?
He thought they were mostly awful. Dingy insufficiencies, he called them, wasting teachers' time and energy. Education needed reorganizing on bolder, more efficient, and more economical lines.
Okay.
How? The big problem, he saw, was you only have so many truly great teachers. How do you scale their impact?
Right.
His answer: standardization and technology. Figure out the absolute best way of teaching every ordinary school subject, standardize that method globally, and then use tech to deliver it.
What kind of tech did he have in mind? This is 1921.
Well, things like standardized, proper lesson notes, massive libraries of pictures and diagrams, he envisioned hundreds of thousands, centrally filed, gramophones for teaching languages, and the big one, the cinematograph, film.
Film as a teaching tool.
Yes. He saw it as the key way to deliver the same high-quality, standardized lessons everywhere in the world. The same stereotype lessons, he wrote, can be delivered globally via film. This would free up the local teacher to focus on discussion, questions, helping individual kids.
The worldwide standardized curriculum delivered by early multimedia. That's quite a vision. Did he think about learning beyond school?
Definitely. Lifelong learning was crucial. College, he argued, should be less about lectures and more about fostering broad convictions, getting students grappling with the great conflicting ideas, even dangerous ones like Bolshevism or different religions, using books and guided discussion.
So less passive listening, more active engagement with ideas.
Exactly. He famously said the modern university is a university of books. Great teachers should write great books to spread their influence, not just lecture to a few hundred students.
And for adults out of college.
He saw adult learning as still pretty basic, but growing societies, lectures. But the main tools were newspapers and books. These were vital for continuing education, for building that common world mind.
But he saw dangers there too.
Oh, absolutely. He warned about the print nexus being corrupted, government control like in Soviet Russia, propaganda, censorship, manipulation by powerful individuals in the West. For print to work as this global educator, it needed to be trustworthy, free from partisan control.
Okay, so let's pull this together. Wells sees his world as deeply dangerous, undereducated, unreasonable, suspicious, base, and ferocious. Pretty damning.
Extremely.
But he holds out this hope, this alternative path through organized education, comprehensive and universal,
Yeah.
using the plain truth as the guide. This, he thinks, is the key to all our human disorder.
It's the only way he sees to get out of the prison of ignorance, prejudice, and passion and into the sunlight. A sweet air of understanding, confident freedoms, and a full creative life.
And the responsibility for making this massive educational shift happen, it doesn't fall on the politician.
No, he's very clear. Politicians and statesmen work within the existing framework of ideas. They react, they manage, but they don't fundamentally change the thinking.
Guess who does?
It's the steadfast educational pressure of a great and growing multitude of convinced people. The real creative responsibility, he says, passes to writers and school teachers, students of social and economic science, professors and poets, editors and journalists, publishers, every sort of propagandist and every sort of disinterested person who can dedicate energy to reshaping the social idea.
Basically the thinkers, the communicators, the educators.
Yes, and he believed that this focus was so important that you almost had to ignore the day-to-day political fights, like the struggle between the property manipulator versus communist fanatic, as he put it.
Why ignore those? They seem pretty important.
Because he felt neither side, operating from their current level of understanding and division, had the capacity to build anything truly better. They lacked the light, the generosity, the creative will. The fundamental work had to happen first, at the educational level, to raise everyone's understanding.
So to recap H.G. Wells in The Salvaging of Civilization, he sees a world teetering on collapse because our political ideas are ancient. But our technology is terrifyingly powerful. War is becoming unsurvivable, the only fix. A world state, and the only way to get there, not through treaties or politics primarily, but through a massive global educational revolution.
Building a shared history, shared values, standardized knowledge, reaching everyone, driven by educators and thinkers, it's a huge, maybe impossible-seeming task he lays out.
It really is. Which brings us to a final thought for you, the listener. Wells argued over a century ago that the key obstacles were apathy and patriotism, and that the burden for saving civilization fell not on leaders, but on educators and communicators. Given the global challenges we face now, climate change, pandemics, AI, conflicts, things Wells might see as flowing from that same tech-politics gap he saw. What does it mean for us today? Was he right? Is the most fundamental challenge still about transforming what and how we learn globally to build that common understanding and shared vision for our future. Is that still the most critical task ahead?